at a certain point, AI will know exactly what you like better than yourself. It will create content that is infinitely more interesting than anything else out there. It's going to be perfectly curated for you.
Yeah. This is an alarming thing. It's fun to look at and play around with, but if you look at it like its direct consequences on our surroundings and our society, this is a horrifying development. Why the fuck are we still moving? Why was it ever released?
Hello, everyone. This is Levon, and welcome to another episode of Radius of Reason. I'm here with my co-host, Andre. Today, on episode 19, we're discussing the topic of artificial intelligence and how it's shaping our world. Join us as we explore the intricacies and implications of AI technology.
Wow.
That was pretty good.
That intro was written by ChatGPT and voiced by a text-to-speech AI by 11 Labs.
Not a single person was involved in that except from the asshole who typed it in and then created a prompt.
Yes. And, you know, if you want to shit on me, I actually got ChatGPT to shit on you, or just at least make a nice little joke.
Oh, God.
Let's check it out.
Let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay. Why did Andre always bring vodka to their podcast recordings?
Oh, boy. It's got to do the vodka stuff, right? Like, what else is going to do about Russians?
Because he wanted to make sure the discussions about philosophy and politics never got too sober. So
that's pretty. I mean, it's not awful.
It's not bad.
I'd say it's like generic grade American humor.
Yeah. No, it could be worse. And actually, I prompted it several times before I got something decent. There was some really bad dad joke level stuff in there.
Well, which just implies that all dad jokes are just like really shitty social programming that we've like pulled from the ether.
Yeah, I mean, we're social programming. I mean, biological programming, biological machines. We are in fact AIs. So I think all that was kind of interesting because we pulled 2 to 3 forms of AI to produce all that. I think 2. We had an AI that generated the text, then we had an AI that recorded it, and then we have an AI sitting right here reacting to it live. But I think we've been trying to talk about AI on the show since we started about a year ago. Yes.
I mean, this has been something that's kind of been happening behind the scenes. And we always said, hey, we talk about it, but other things kind of took hold. And then I'd say in the past like 3 months, everybody's talking about AI, right? Everybody's talking about DALL-E, everybody's talking about ChatGPT.
Well, they're not even just talking about it. People are using it. I mean, we both have coworkers that are using it. In fact, in a recent meeting at my job, you know, I found out like I'm one of the few people not using ChatGPT. So, we're kind of seeing the progression at an exponential level. But as you were saying, you know, ChatGPT, DALL-E, Midjourney.
Yeah, and I'd say all these kind of dropped within a month or two of November 2022. And it really seems like we're living through right now what is kind of the mass popular deployment of AI platforms to a certain extent, where, like you said, people, it's not just like, oh, here's a cool video on YouTube that was generated by an AI. People are actually able to sit down and produce their own pieces of work with these AI tools. And I think that is a pretty unprecedented thing where it's kind of been delivered to the masses. And I think it raises a lot of really curious points, some alarming, but it's definitely, I think, the point we're going to look back on. And I honestly think November 2022 is going to be a date that we look back on and be like, yes, this is in fact when all this bullshit kicked off.
Well, speaking of alarming, let's look at some alarming examples of AI generated content. So obviously we've already shared a few pieces of that, but you created these next few items with...
No, I did not create them. These are pulled off of Twitter, but the users were creating them with Midjourney AI. Which is one of the bigger image generating tools. Yes. Now, what's really kind of crazy about these, as you'll see in a second, initially text to image generators, I think DALL-E kind of really became a big deal on the internet maybe last spring. it was obviously quirky and funny, but you couldn't really generate convincing people, right? It was still like blatantly obvious when something was AI generated. With Midjourney now, you can tweak the text prompt to the point where you're actually creating fairly realistic, I'd say almost entirely convincing photos of people. So yeah, this is a series. The first couple are from an AI generated party that was happening, I think, in like New York City. And I mean, it's down to things like, you know, the sweat on somebody's face, or maybe just like the general facial expressions, which kind of connotates like an ambient TikTok type
the light, you know? From the camera. God, it's pretty astonishing.
Right.
Moving on to the next one. What is this?
This is a bunch of dude bros having a good time. You know, sometimes you hang out with your boys and you just drink out of different colored small cups. And
like, this one, like triplets, man.
I mean, but this one's a little bit more like dicey, right? You can tell something's off. First of all, the fingers are all weird.
Yes.
And yeah, everybody kind of looks the same. Although I will say,
God, those fingers are terrifying.
It kind of took the generic, and I'm like, you know, preaching to the choir. It took like a generic male haircut from 2022. But yeah, again, this wasn't really something possible in the public.
Some of us are just happy to have hair at all.
You know, so. bless.
Hashtag blessed. But no, it's nonetheless, it's still quite impressive. Now the next one.
Yeah, this is crazy. This is a Twitter user. He generated. So this is also AI generated. These, I mean, they look creepy as hell. I'm not gonna lie, like empty in the eyes. But a Twitter user was kind of making a point that eventually, quite soon, he's essentially going to be able to make an OnlyFans page using AI generated models. And to prove his point, he used some of the other tools out there. It was a combination of a couple, I think, for this image in particular. But he essentially produced an entire series of images of women that he crafted in like the AI text prompt, dressed in like lingerie and scantily clad.
That's actually really interesting. I mean, does the guy understand though who said that? Like, okay, he's going to create an AI only OnlyFans page.
Yeah.
The problem is once those tools are available, other people will be able to create the same content just basically through the tools and wouldn't subscribe to stupid OnlyFans.
Well, I mean,
it's a bit self-defeating once you get to that point.
Self-defeating.
But until then, he could make millions.
But the first couple of months with this are going to be absolutely crazy when, you know, maybe it's a little bit more difficult to generate like photorealistic,
like women, high quality,
but also of like a consistent quality too, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you have people like simping over entities that don't really exist. Right.
Yeah, and I mean, even 2 months of that might be sufficient to guarantee that guy's retirement.
Right. Exactly. Right?
So yeah, no, I mean, this is like unbelievable quality. This next one here is a kind of a sample logo of Radius of Reason.
And this is a really good point too. Like we paid money to have somebody design it.
We paid $100 for a logo that this AI has outdone in seconds.
Like 30 seconds, and I paid like $10 to get access to Midjourney. Right. And you can kind of tweak it based off of whatever prompts you want. This is just, I threw together a text prompt in like a couple of seconds. I mean, this is something that you would likely have expected somebody to take some time to produce as early as like a year ago. Right. And now all of a sudden you can sign into this app, throw in a couple words, and boom, you have a podcast logo. Pretty impressive. The next one, again, a little zanier. Also, again, podcast logo prompt generated in, I think, 30 seconds. That's $100 we paid for.
I've noticed this in some of the content generated by Midjourney, but some of like the fractal looking pieces like are like a, you know, they're kind of a tell that it was AI generated.
Yeah, and Midjourney is interesting because I think with the photos that we just showed of like the college kids at a party in New York, it's pretty telling again, like when the hands start coming into the picture, because like for some reason the AI just can't get like fingers right. But with the first two girls that we showed, you couldn't, like, it's just their torsos, and I mean it looks convincing. And quite honestly, if that came up on somebody's like Instagram or Facebook page, I just think it's like a couple of their friends hanging out. But yeah, I think that there's definitely some tells. And what's important, though, is that Midjourney has only been public since November. And it's already like convincing enough that with a little bit more time and tweaking, like it's just going to be almost flawless.
Yes, no, that's the truly terrifying thing is we're at the baby stages of AI.
Yes.
And well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're going to really dissect this. But before we do that, we would like to encourage everybody to subscribe, hit the like button, comment something stupid.
Tweet at us.
Tweet even.
At radius_reason.
Follow us on all the podcast platforms out there.
We're there. We're out here. We are 100% not AI generated.
We don't have ads. We don't do ads. This is 100% self-funded.
Yes.
So do go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Help us out. Okay, moving on. I guess before we really like Ben Stiller. Oh, I am a Ben Stiller clone AI.
Algorithms fucking man.
Let's define some terms.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got AI, which when we use this term, we're going to refer to it generally for artificial intelligence as a whole. Now, sometimes it could be used to refer to more narrow AI, like something like Midjourney and DALL-E are narrow AIs in that their only function is to create graphics based on a
spread butter.
But it could refer to AGI as well. AGI being artificial general intelligence, which is an intelligence that's capable of basically learning and doing any task.
Right. So it's kind of almost removing the human inserting a text prompt into the equation. It allows the AI to essentially know exactly what function it's trying to achieve and being able to get better at that function as it moves along without direct input.
Yes, it essentially, it have its own agency to a sense. Though it not to be conflated with having sentience. Right? You could have something that appears to have agency, that appears to be completely human-like in terms of its ability to understand and do things, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's self-aware.
Right.
But it could be. But it could be self-aware too. So there's some nuance in what AGI could actually encompass.
Right.
And then you get to a term like singularity, which is this hypothetical future point in time where we've had a runaway superintelligence and we're either living in a tech utopia or a tech dystopia.
Regardless, we're probably still a little bit far off from it. And I think with how prevalent things like Midjourney and ChatGPT have been the past few months, it is still like quite a ways away from singularity. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
No, let's talk about it now. Oh. How far are we from like AGI?
Well, I think this is like the $1 million question, right? And I think it's very easy to fall into a trap seeing very sophisticated images of OnlyFans models coming up. It's very easy to think that, oh my gosh, this is it. Like we are there. I think, my personal opinion, and then I'll talk a little bit about the research, but I think that we are quite a ways away from reaching any sort of sentience within the AI. I think right now, all these very impressive tools.
Speak to me in more concrete terms, in terms of years. When you're saying far away, are you referring to 10 years, 50 years, 100 years?
So I think that consensus in research around this, like when you have computer scientists like MIT putting out papers, they're talking about towards the end of the century.
End of the century.
Where we not for sentience, but when we hit a level of generalized intelligence.
Okay.
So 2075 is kind of the date that's thrown around a lot. And that's at a point where AI will get to a state where it will be able to teach itself how to do things. It would be able to operate with a level of autonomy in an effective manner, right? The problem with that prediction is that prediction's been made consistently for like decades. There's the biggest one that came out of Oxford University in 2013 was saying that AI will get sophisticated enough to start essentially like eliminating entire job markets by like 2040. And we're not there yet in terms of the time frame, but clearly the technology isn't anywhere where it needs to be right now to start like pricing out significant segments of the workforce.
But okay,
and they've
sure.
actually and Oxford actually has come out and they've amended their original prediction. And even before that, as like maybe the scientific romanticism of like the 1970s, people were talking about like with the Turing machines, right? The very elementary sort of quote unquote artificial intelligence that was used during World War II to crack German military codes. People were pointing to that in the 70s, being that like, well, we've developed so much from that in fact, by 2000, we're going to have like complete generalized AI, or maybe like almost singularity. And again, prediction fell short. So I think that this is like a difficult thing to nail down perfectly. I think right now, AI is very much at a stage of mimicry, right? Where if you look at some of these images that are being created by Midjourney, you can sort of start telling they're pulling from various source data points on the internet, because there's a level of like commonality and like, okay, yeah, this is a photo of people at a party, and you can almost tell that, yeah, there's a couple of stock images they threw together with like a photo filter on there, right? So it's still very much at imitation, and it's not anywhere near a level of sophistication where, with the text prompts for ChatGPT, for instance, you made the point of like, oh, this is a few steps above a dad joke. Well, I mean, it's really kind of awkwardly trying to replicate something quite sophisticated in humor, right?
Yeah. And so I agree with you that, AGI, putting a timeline on that is difficult, and it's not clear, if it will be, another 50 years or sooner. I don't know. What I've read is consistent with the fact that the current models, with what you said, the fact that the current language learning models, which is what ChatGPT is, and what the primary kind of structure of these AIs are of this day, that these are insufficient to ever get to sort of a sentience or even an AGI. Now, they might mimic an AGI to some extent. They might pass the Turing test, right? But that doesn't get us to what we're really hoping for with an AGI or a sentient AI.
And I think this is ultimately all we're really getting to right now, is the simulation of maybe human intelligence, right? It's the simulation of what an AI should be. It's kind of a facade, right? Where I think with Midjourney, for instance, it almost feels like it's creating this image out of thin air, but it's not. Like, all those images exist out there on the internet, and Midjourney has been taught to sort of scrape them together based on the inputs.
Let me play devil's advocate for a second. Yeah. As a human being, though, other artists, they learn your brain is like a sponge early on. You suck in information from the outside world. Your brain doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's always gathering data. So is it fair to criticize AI for being like, well, you're relying on data from humans, or because to the AI, that is its external world, right?
Yeah. Thank you for championing AI rights. You are the true social justice warrior. I think you're right. And I think it's not to talk shit on the AI, but I think it's to talk shit on, ultimately speaking, what our business model, where it is right now very profitable, and it will be profitable to simulate sentience as best as possible. And because it's impressive, it generates clicks and likes, and right now everything I think is based on like app downloads too, where ChatGPT right now, from what I've read, has exceeded the popularity of things like TikTok, right? It's huge. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody's like, boomer parents are even like trying to
I think it has over 100 million users.
I mean, it's insane, right? But I think that's part of business model too. A couple of days ago, there's a New York Times article, and it was talking about the fact that the reason why all of these AI platforms that we've mentioned, ChatGPT, Midjourney, even some of the speech to voice, like deepfake accounts and stuff. The reason why it seems like they're all hitting the market like right now is because somebody in Silicon Valley realized that, hey, we need to start churning these things out to start justifying the very large investments that were made. So in ChatGPT, they actually weren't planning on releasing what is now like the really famous app in November. But within weeks, they got instructions to do so because they needed to show something for their investment. And there was a worry that if they didn't get in front of the text generating platforms, they weren't the first one, somebody else would get it.
Yeah, there's the first mover advantage, which they've very well seized. Now, here's one point I want to make. I don't think we need AGI or sentient AI in any capacity to completely disrupt the markets. And and I think what ChatGPT has showed is you have something that is really, again, in its most primitive form, right? The most primitive, like, publicly available AI that is somewhat useful that's ever been released, right? Like, this is the first one. And people, like we said, are already using it at work to gain an advantage over their coworkers. We know that Microsoft has, invested $10 billion into ChatGPT. They're going to be incorporating it into their products, like Teams.
Or Outlook too, yeah.
And I think, I think certain jobs are already at a risk. Not yet, but they are at a risk in terms of they are within reach for a couple of, improved models of ChatGPT, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years, because of the way that this technology evolves, the pace at which it evolves. I think certain positions are already kind of in view of getting replaced or somehow severely impacted by people who are now using AI, one person doing the work of 10.
Well, I think it also probably underscores that in a white-collar job market, a lot of job functions are probably just bullshit. And that's kind of the uncomfortable truth that a lot of these AI platforms are exposing, is that in like a post-industrial economy where you're not like in a factory like welding or doing some shit, largely speaking, a lot of your job is fluff. And that this is speaking as somebody who is a white-collar worker, right? Where yeah, you can outsource a lot of these things. Now, I think, is it the apocalyptic scenario where all of a sudden we're going to see, for a great example is, again, ChatGPT, there's a pretty effective demonstration of it can write code pretty well, right? And to your point, I think a lot of programmers are starting to incorporate it to at least run some elementary lines of code and whatnot. I think that it's not a scenario where we're going to have ChatGPT come in and just like eliminate the entire pool of software developers. I think what's going to happen, probably as an augmentation, is it's going to serve as a resource to cut out some of the fluff that somebody like a software developer has to deal with, so they can actually focus maybe on more intellectually heavy capacities, right? Maybe thinking about like strategic planning or crafting like effective designs for the software or something.
Interacting with the client and what I concur. But I'm not, I guess. So again, it goes back to the point of like, you've got one software developer, like let's say in 5 years, you've got one software developer who can now do the work of 10 because he's cut out so much fluff due to ChatGPT version 10 or 5 or whatever is out at that point. And I think that's going to be disruptive enough. There was, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but there was a report that said 85 million jobs by 2025 are at risk. That's in 2 years. I believe it's 2025. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, 2025. So the main point I want to make is we don't need to reach an AGI or a sentient AI to have a lot of catastrophic issues arise when it comes to the job market, when it comes to the proliferation of politically disruptive content, for example. Deep fakes, right? Like deep fakes. We're already at a point where deep fakes can be a problem. We are already at a point with the text to speech and with some of the actual photographic capabilities, right?
Well, and I mean, we were kind of joking around before we went on air. There was the controversial 4chan post that sort of proliferated through the internet. Somebody took a deepfake generator and essentially produced a version of Emma Watson reading Mein Kampf. And I mean, it sounded pretty convincing. Like, is it Emma Watson? Like, or is it like a vaguely British sounding posh lady? Like, whatever. But it generated something, and then it said, oh yeah, this is Emma Watson doing it. And I'm sure somebody somewhere was like, oh shit, this could be real. But really quick, I wanted to loop back around regarding jobs, right? And the impact it's going to have on the workforce. I think what's really fascinating about what we're going through right now with things like ChatGPT is that all of a sudden now we're directly talking about the impact AI will have on white collar roles. With blue collar in the service industry, that's almost been kind of an accepted thing. We're like, yeah, eventually, like, we're going to have all of our cashiers be automated, and we're not going to need people working at CVS anymore. And I remember for a brief moment during the 2016 election where Andrew Yang's campaign was very much built up on this notion of, hey, we need universal basic income because every long haul trucker is going to be out of a job within like a decade. And there was a lot of like, oh my gosh, hand wringing. But like the majority of like the upper middle class probably felt safe to a certain degree because AI wasn't something they would stare at every day, right? Yeah. I mean, I remember distinctly that I was in, I think, DC, and I was getting a sandwich from Panera. And this was like maybe 2015 or 16, and there's already 2 cashiers and 3 checkout kiosks. So those people had to stare down AI to a certain extent every day. But the more white collar workers didn't really have to deal with it as much. But now in 2022, you have these platforms come up, and all of a sudden it's like, oh shit. Like, you know, the trope they would always say, like, oh, you're like, your job is no longer viable. Like a coal miner, go learn how to code. It was kind of like an elitist, like bullshit, like response to people getting upset about their like livelihoods being taken away. But now it's like, bitch, like
now the coders got to learn. The coders
got to find something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, back to the point I was making at the start, we're going to look back on 2022 as like a watershed moment, like when all this shit kicked off. And the fact that you have high schoolers having entire essays written on ChatGPT and submitting them for like assignments, and the teachers don't know better right now, right? And that again raises so many questions around yes, this is going to have an impact on the workforce. What is it going to do with education? What is it going to do with academia?
Yeah. That's actually the next kind of core topic that we want to focus on. Are the dangers of AI, ranging from ChatGPT as it is currently to obviously down the road, an AGI. So we have a lot of problems already in society, and I think you believe that they're going to be further exacerbated by the implementation of AI.
Yeah, I don't think the incorporation of AI into our kind of day-to-day existence, I don't think it's going to cause any new problems right now. I think all of these things that
right now,
yeah, I can't predict whatever Blade Runner future we're going to be in like 50 years, but let's say within the next 5 years, all of the problems that we're going to have with this are going to be directly linked to problems we're already dealing with. You know, with social media, with the veracity of information, with mass amounts of internet consumption, addiction to pornography, all these things.
Well, let's look at a few of these like more closely. Sure. So like we already have issues with bots and fake news and content online generated by, really it's already generated somewhat by AI, but I mean, like primitive bots are basically AI, right?
Yeah, so I mean, all the fellas out there on the dating apps, they know what it's like. Swipe, you get matched, very, very attractive person, probably very well educated based off the profile. Oh shit, it's a bot. I mean, that's only gonna get worse.
Yeah. That just trying to filter through all this content is, over time, it's going to become exponentially more difficult because of the proliferation of all this content.
Like, it'd be a really interesting thing to do. Create a fake Tinder profile using only AI generated images of like a dude or a girl, and just seeing how.
I mean, it's going to work very effectively.
Probably.
There's no question.
Maybe a future video.
Yeah, we can run that experiment. But yeah, I have no doubt in my mind that it would work more effectively than most people's actual profiles. So, I mean, the other issue that I think comes with the use of technologies like ChatGPT is that they come with a sort of moral/political bent, or what is it called? Moral bloatware, which is a great term.
Yeah.
Bloatware is like, the shitty apps that you get when you buy a new computer.
Right.
And you have to go delete all of it. It has it tries to bias you to use certain things in the same way ChatGPT, as people have tried to show online, it seems to have some, I think some or most would argue as a left-leaning bent because of the people that probably created it.
Oh, Jesus.
But then again, they ran experiments where it seems like it's kind of neutral. I don't know what the actual reality of the situation is, but if you think about it, on some level, either someone has to determine kind of its basic parameters of what it's going to find acceptable and not acceptable, right? And we see that when you ask it certain questions, it says, no, I'm sorry, I can't touch this topic. That, yeah. Or if it's using a data set, someone has to determine what goes into the data set. Or if it's using the entire internet, well,
there was
it's whatever there's more of, it's going to have that bent. And then you might have an issue where people are trying to create more and more shit just to propagandize their view of things, so that when the AI synthesizes all the information,
it's going to be more likely to be. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a horrifying possibility. And I'm imagining like the algorithms that these AI tools operate on are like locked in like the world's safest vault somewhere, because like, Christ, that would be such a shit show if somebody cracked it and figured out how to play it a little bit. But I mean, there was that, was it Microsoft released like a chat bot about 5 or 6 years ago? And within like 2 days, it was just spewing like the most racist vitriol ever.
Yeah, that's the internet.
I mean,
but as far as the security goes, man, I don't know. I know this is a little bit different, but like the biolabs, like level 4, like top, level labs that are doing like the most insane research on the most deadly viruses and diseases. I mean, there's been so many reports of leaks from those, and we've got something very tangible that can eradicate humanity.
Are you saying COVID was
COVID was a leak, man? But in the same way, I don't know. Like, if you have an AI that's kind of, where it's kind of base code, it's more sacred algorithms are like protected in some sort of like digital vault. What's to say that someone can't create another AI that is able to hack that?
Right. Well, yeah, it's like the infinity loop of scenarios. But I think that it does get really dangerous, I think, to me, with almost the AI itself. Right. When I first read about Midjourney, it was over the holidays. And I was up late one night and I saw some photos somebody generated of Home Alone 2 if it took place in the Soviet Union. And I actually thought it was a real movie for a second. And I was like, oh, wow, like I didn't know that was like a thing. And, the Soviets like tried their own thing in terms of like their cinema making. But I found the tool, I signed in, and for like 5 hours, I was gone. Because you can, essentially will into existence, like if you've had like a story you've been telling yourself, or like a fantasy as a kid of like a planet somewhere, you can all of a sudden generate those images in real time, which in itself is like a very addictive, like very, very captivating process where you can like realistically create things that otherwise, unless you're like a talented painter or like a sculptor, will be very hard to materialize in thin air. So the fact is, in addition to all of the very addictive things on the internet that are programmed to be addictive and to capture as much of your attention as possible, all of a sudden now you have these tools that you can essentially create anything you want. And that in itself is like an exceptionally addictive thing.
Yeah, I mean, think about how addictive social media has been, and now amplify that times a bazillion.
Right.
Because, at a certain point, AI will know exactly what you like better than yourself. It will create content that is infinitely more interesting than anything else out there. It's going to be perfectly curated for you.
Yeah.
We like the impact that's going to have on society is it cannot be underestimated.
Absolutely.
Like, and I don't think we will be able to prepare enough for this. Like, it's not even possible. Right.
Well, I think we're seeing symptoms of it already with just high levels of internet usage. I can't think it off the top of my head, but there's a term for young men in Japan that essentially like reject society and focus exclusively on like locking themselves in their apartments and just like watching anime and like browsing the internet, right? I think what you're describing is going to be that multiplied to like almost an infinite magnitude. Because if you can have a source of entertainment that is tailor-made to your interests and your preferences, you're never going to want to leave that.
And in terms of like, so that's like, you're looking at that in terms of like content and like engaging content. Yeah. And yes, that will be maxed as much as possible. But on top of that, you're going to have sentient level like AI friends or relationships, right?
Oh gosh, yeah.
And then when you couple that with like virtual reality and then AI generated pornography,
yeah,
you're talking about, you're getting every need filled, you know, in your room,
right?
And with Uber Eats, and AI generated food.
Generated food.
Well, AI crafted recipes
tailored to
your specific needs and your dietary requirements, delivered by Uber Eats. You never have to leave your room, and you will be, in terms of dopamine, maxed out basically indefinitely.
And I think the scary thing is with that, and we talked about this a little bit as we were preparing for the show, where we discussed this point that all of these AI tools, they're not coming from a university system, or this isn't like publicly funded research for the betterment of humanity that's releasing tools for people to play around and explore with, right? All of these tools have money behind it. And I think that's something that's not really spoken about enough, is that this is like the next wave of obsessive funding hitting Silicon Valley, where there is so much obvious potential to monetize these sorts of things, to monetize individual preferences, that investors are just piling onto these things. Like with many circumstances, I think right now we're seeing like almost like a collective hyperventilation from investors to just get on top of this technology as fast as possible. And they're just dumping money into companies that produce things like ChatGPT. And this is happening simultaneously as Silicon Valley is undergoing, I think, a pretty tumultuous phase. Like every week you're hearing about layoffs hitting like the major tech companies, like Apple's revenue fell by like 20%. And the question is like, what is going to be the next big thing to come out of Silicon Valley? Social media is kind of, I think it's burned a lot of people out. People are kind of pissed off at Twitter. People are pissed off at Meta/Facebook. And now you have this new thing coming up and everybody's interested in it. And the money is just pouring in. And I think the scary thing, to build off of what you were saying, is that indeed, what if you can have companies crafting these entire experiences for you that are almost infinite in potential and maximizes revenue?
Well, we know that's exactly what they're going to do.
Exactly.
We know that from their track record. We know that them hijacking our dopamine sensors are like the most financially lucrative thing to do.
Yes.
So I guess we'll have to touch on this in a little bit, but we're going to have to devise government policy in a very intelligible manner.
And I think this kind of underscores the underlying theme that I think we're trying to emphasize here, is the fact that all the problems we have today, these are going to be the same problems we're dealing with at a whole nother scale when we start integrating artificial intelligence into the fold.
And you know, I don't want the government to treat its citizens like children, but we're going to need some fucking help. Well, we are going to need help.
Yes.
From not just from the government, we collectively as a society need to figure out how to help ourselves beyond just government.
There needs to be enough regulation in place that we have breathing room to at least think about these things. And right now, I don't know if there are any like age restrictions on things like ChatGPT. I don't really recall having to like.
I don't think so.
Verify. Yeah. So, I mean, even something like, I mean, again, like I agree with your point about government not treating its citizens like children, but I think that's a level of like, I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but there is a level of like batshit crazy libertarianism out there where it's like, yeah, we should give meth to everybody. it should be on the individual to decide. Sure.
Well,
yes,
this will literally be like giving meth to everyone. This is actually will be the digital equivalent of that.
Maybe even far worse than meth, because with meth, at least there's, I think, like a social stigma. Like you don't go like smoke meth in like an office somewhere.
And meth isn't also intrinsically tied to a tool you use every day.
Right.
The computer.
And it's not tied to your cell phone and all this kind of stuff. And I think that without regulation, in which let's kind of establish reality as it is, we are, if things continue as they are, and with I'd say the complete lack of controls that we have over big tech in this country, and the sort of veneration we have of startup culture and hustle culture and all this stuff, if we continue down this path, it is not going to be a good fate for anybody, because it's going to be the complete shift of all of our like attention-based economies towards an AI grounded model, and it's going to absolutely decimate everybody here. We don't stand a chance right now.
I mean, yes, and all you don't even have to take all of these issues combined, which are, synergistically going to be like deadly, like the combination. You just have to pick one. So like, let's just say the AI generated pornography.
Yes.
The impact that could have on sex and relationships and population collapse alone could be just catastrophic.
Look,
right?
I think already mass access to streamable pornography has already altered human sexuality to a certain extent, right? Like,
we don't see enough people talking about that.
We don't. But all right, let me throw something out at you. Like the notion of eating ass, right?
yes. Go on.
I don't think I ever heard anybody say that. Oh my God, I'm having a kids these days moment.
Before like what, 2010 or 20?
No, like, man, like when I was in high school, I think when I was like stepping into my sexuality, I don't think I ever heard anybody once reference eating ass. But now it's almost like it's like a meme at this point, right?
Now you have to do it.
Now it's like a standard, like, you get married, you have a kid, and you eat some ass. But I mean,
you got to eat ass before you get married.
You got to make sure. You got to know.
It's just what I heard, man. That's just what I heard.
Profit. But look, all right. So we already have examples that pornography has like shifted our sexualities to a certain extent. And to your point, now you have pornography that's generated tailor-made to somebody's preferences without any of the nuances of having an actual physical relationship, things like consent or respect for a partner's preferences, or even just like the day-to-day norms of being in a relationship with somebody where sex isn't always like something that's offered up and you have to navigate, oh fuck, I gotta pay taxes with being horny at the same time. That is completely gone when you have an experience that could be produced without any baggage to maximize your own pleasure and arousal.
Yeah, and I don't see any solution. Like, if we're gonna just stay on this topic here, I don't see any solution other than just outright banning it. Like, I don't see how anything other than just an outright ban would suffice.
If it's banned, you're gonna have some like back alley.
Well, practically, there's another consideration of can it actually be banned, which is even scarier.
Right.
But like theoretically, if you could perfectly ban this from the government standpoint, I would say the benefits would outweigh any costs that would be associated.
And I think banning it as early as possible is like the only way to do it.
Because at some point, once the cat's out of the bag,
it's out of the bag.
Like once people, like if enough government officials are looking at AI generated porn, it's going to have such an appeal that there's no way they're going to pass any laws to ban it, right? Look, they're going to be completely captive by.
I think the cat is already out of the bag, and that's the scariest thing. And like we were joking around and laughing at this, like haha, like AI generated OnlyFans models, but that's actually pretty fucking horrifying because already, both for men and women, there's already higher rates of like body dysmorphia right now, right? Because of Instagram and like this constant pressure to be like your absolute best game. But if you think about now, you're not even competing with like a real human that just happens to be like at the peak of physical performance
or slightly photoshopped.
Yeah, like a Kardashian approach, whatever. You're actually now competing with something that isn't even real, that from its genesis is made to be perfect and tweakable based off of somebody's sexual preferences. I can't imagine what that's going to do for teenagers, right? Like, I mean, I was insecure enough as a teenage guy, But if I had to like think about like that standard to like work with, or like teenage girls, right? I mean, with social media, there's been studies that higher rates of suicide amongst teenage girls, right? Because it's you're constantly comparing yourself to almost an unreachable standard, and it's only going to get worse. And maybe this is like, I think things like Midjourney, maybe speaking for personal experience, will not create explicit images. These tools that are producing these like OnlyFans models, these aren't like the mainstream like big three that everybody's talking about. I think these are more like niche, more like heavily developer focused tools where it requires a little bit more finesse to produce these sorts of images. I think that's exactly where we should cap it at.
Yeah. Yes. But yeah, I just don't think it's going to become a big enough issue until it's too late.
Well, as with most things, I think.
Right. So I think once the baseline level of like AI knowledge increases and you do have these smaller companies starting to really hone that technology and then putting it out, you know, and people consuming this kind of pornography, and then, you know, it becomes a recursive thing where now the money generated leads to improvement of that said technology.
Yeah.
Then you're really fucked. Because at some point that AI generated, that the algorithms or the AI generating porn is going to outcompete what's publicly available for other uses because of the amount of money that it'll be able to generate through porn. We know the porn industry is fucking massive.
Yeah.
Right? What is it? What's that stat? That like 90% of the internet's porn? Well, it's going to be like even more after, like, I mean, like, I just, I don't see how we contain that. But we may circle back to this topic in a little bit. Let's kind of continue on this list of the dangers of AI, because it is very interesting to discuss. We've heard reports now that schools have noticed students using ChatGPT to write essays and cheat on exams and whatnot. And now they're kind of requiring students to perform oral exams. I don't know why that's funny, but I have grown up. Sometimes I revert back to a younger self. But,
whatever, man. Like primal brain takes over. Oral exam. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, that's again, like, that's massive. Like, what does AI do to the education system? Right.
Well, I mean, not even just thinking about like K through 12, but university systems, right? And do you remember about 3 years ago, there was a kind of a gag that turned pretty serious where somebody submitted a bunch of like random ass white papers they like concocted for publication, and they got published, where like somebody was like studying rape culture in dogs, and it got like approved and released.
I don't know if I heard of that particular one, but I've heard of crazy.
Yeah. But so there's clearly, again, to our point, there's an issue with things like academic publishing as it stands now. That is only going to be taken to the next level, where somebody concocts absolute insanity. I mean, shit. Okay. Think about it this way. The anti-vax movement is all basically grounded in like a single piece of quote unquote academic research that was published questioning the, or introducing the argument that vaccines may lead to autism, right? I think I haven't read this report, but from what I understand, that was largely debunked by the scientific community. But imagine if you just flood academia with a bunch of AI generated papers to support a certain like political position, where all of a sudden you're saying things like the COVID vaccine, right? Let's say in 10 years we are in another pandemic and we require another vaccine, and then all of a sudden somebody starts pointing to all this research, quote unquote, that they've developed, saying that, oh yeah, these are, you know, PhDs based out of MIT that are saying, you know, actually you don't need this vaccine.
Now, yes. To be fair, there will be an AI arms race where people will be developing AI that tries to detect AI generated content.
Yeah.
ChatGPT actually has already released a tool that allows somebody to kind of analyze, you know, certain text to check if it was generated by AI, but it's only 26% accurate. So the terrifying thing is the people that developed ChatGPT can only at best 26% detect its own content, right?
So maybe
like they have the source code. They know everything that you could possibly know about ChatGPT. Now, obviously, to some extent, these algorithms are black boxes.
Yeah. But
the way that they're designed. But to the extent that you can know anything about it, like they know everything. And 26% is all they can do. That is horrifying. Because even if it was 90%, it's still horrifying. Because 10%, when you have a technology where you can basically create an infinite amount of content, it's already game over.
Yeah.
Like 10%, 1%, right? You need you need basically like almost perfect accuracy, like 99.9% or some shit.
Even that, I think, again, because
it's the same principle. In principle, it's the same problem.
We have to assume that the scale of content is infinite because it's constantly being generated.
Yeah, so it's almost an inescapable problem, right? And all it takes is, like even if you do get to 100%, right? Then it just a year later, somebody comes up with an AI tool that
it's going to be more popular because
because think about that. Then you have governments competing against one another, trying to weave different propaganda into culture and society to for their political gain. Like there's always an incentive to go undetected, right? That's always going to be the case.
And I want to talk about that and expand a little bit on that. And I want to actually hear your thoughts on what these AI tools are going to do to politics and the implications of things like sophisticated deepfakes or, really realistic image generators. What is that going to do to elections, for instance, here in the United States?
Well, if history is any indicator of future events,
oh God,
then looking at how easily fake news has been disseminated and believed by the masses, we're completely fucked. I don't know if I have to go into any more detail. Like it's only gonna be a harder problem. Like it's not gonna get easier.
Right.
The tools we have, as we just discussed, are probably not going to be sufficient. And even if they were, people still want to even if you had ChatGPT release 100% successful tool in detecting, AI generated content, and we maintain that for all the tools for video generated AI, where Joe Biden is saying X, Y, and Z. If you put that shit on Facebook, they see it once, they're going to believe it. It doesn't matter if there's a correction sent out later.
It's going to verify whatever bullshit opinion somebody already has. And I think there's the other side of the coin to that is that now you'll be able to dismiss things as deepfakes. Like if a investigative journalist finds footage of
it goes the other way, yeah,
like Joe Biden at a ceremony sacrificing a child with Donald Trump too, when they all hang out, they can be like, oh, you know what, this is all deepfake. It's deepfake, and already people are using that excuse to a certain extent, right? Where they hacked my Twitter account.
That's what we're gonna say when people look at our podcast 20 years from now.
Yeah. Oh, dude, deepfake, deepfake. We'd never say that. Us. I mean, our political careers are basically shut down at this point anyways. Plus, we're immigrants from post-Soviet.
Yeah, we never had a chance.
Yeah, we never stood a chance.
Yeah. But no, I think I honestly, I don't know what to say. I think we see this coming. Nothing's gonna get done because government's slow as fuck to do anything. We're just kind of sitting ducks at the moment, That's what it feels like.
Because I think that is very much where we're at, and that's a consequence of our politics of the past 2 decades, where maybe even 3 decades, we are 100% beholden to money in politics. And while there is a vested financial interest to see these sorts of tools massively proliferated, there's going to be no policy that comes out to control it. We can't even pass effective policy to break up massive tech companies like Amazon. There's zero impetus for it on Capitol Hill.
Is AI the undoing of capitalism?
I think AI is the natural consequence of capitalism. I don't think it's undoing. I think it's just the natural progression, because as you were talking about everything, I kept on thinking to myself, if this is objectively such a bad thing, and I don't think anybody would really disagree with us regardless of their political orientation, this is an alarming thing. It's fun to look at and play around with, but if you look at it like its direct consequences on our surroundings and our society, this is a horrifying development. Why the fuck are we still moving? Why was it ever released? And I think the answer is really, it's just that rate of our capitalist economy, right? Almost this like
the infinite growth model,
the infinite growth model. This
the demand of the investors to get returns, right?
An absolutely unregulated, unrestricted, unrestrained capitalistic system that is always going to be producing these sorts of things, because why the fuck not? And there isn't any, like, I don't think anybody could answer why these tools are being released, right? They're not, like, we talked about some of, and we'll get into that in a little bit, the utility of these tools, but it's not like ChatGPT was released specifically for the purpose of helping autistic children learn how to communicate better. That was never the explicit reason for why this was released. It was released because it could be. And that, I think,
because it's going to make money.
And I think that's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's terrifying to talk about this, honestly.
And if you're enjoying our conversation, if you're enjoying our hot takes, and you enjoy the fact that we are 100% organic human matter producing podcasts, hit that like button. Ding, ding, ding. Follow us on Twitter. Find us on your favorite podcast app. Make sure to subscribe.
Write some stupid comment.
The
AI algorithm really enjoys it.
Criticize our hairlines, please. Please. We have beautiful, beautiful hairlines. You look great. I look great. I don't know what they're talking about. Yes. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's transition to some of the benefits that AI will bring upon society without completely dooming here. I mean, we talked about like education and plagiarism and all these issues, but think about an AI and how effective it could be in the palm of your hands, on your phone, curating all the information that you would ever need to know for the specific goals that you have in your life. From a young age, like it could really, having a full understanding of human psychology, be the perfect teacher, right? Like it's inevitable that would be the case given, AGI.
Yeah. I think there's definitely opportunities for positive outcomes. I think we'd have to split it up into two categories, being reality of what we have right now, the circumstances we have right now, which we just talked about, and with potential tweaking of regulation to where it could be at, right? Right now, as it stands, I think the biggest benefit we get from AI is just entertainment value, is the fact that it's kind of fun to like plug shit into Midjourney and see it produce, dopey images and whatnot. I will say something that Midjourney, which has a pretty active like community across all the social channels, a really interesting consequence of Midjourney, which I would say is good and bad depending on if you're a graphic designer or not. But I've seen people finally be able to illustrate entire like storylines that they've written, right? So you have amateur comic book artists who have like an idea, can now all of a sudden create an entire like graphic novel using Midjourney. And it's a very controversial thing because they coined this term online of like, I'm an AI artist, which is, I think, I'm on the other side of the issue. I'm like, you're not an artist. Maybe you're a very talented writer that's able to like set scenery that Midjourney works with. And it's probably going to price out a lot of people that would otherwise make $100 on the side making a logo for a podcast. But it is allowing, I think, for a level of greater creative expression where somebody who's written a screenplay can now essentially illustrate all the major scenes in it.
Well, or when they have AI generated video tools available, which they're already working on these, by the way, and they're very crude right now. But clearly the technology will improve. Now, I don't know if it's like, going to be an exponential improvement over the next few years because it's not, it's not a direct line from from photo generation to video generation. I think they have a lot of difficult, technical problems to solve, but I do think eventually they will have it. And when you can craft any kind of movie that you want at will, that's perfectly tailored to your, to your upbringing, to all the interesting references in your life, to all your desires and your current psychological state of mind, like every single parameter that you can think of. When you have that capability, I mean, that is like as terrifying as the downsides of that are and how captivating it's going to be. That's fucking amazing.
Yes.
Like that is mind blowing. At some point, they'll have some Neuralink shit where they can recall your dreams you had and then turn it into a whole full blown movie.
Or your nightmares.
Or a VR experience that you can live through. Imagine that, right? Like that level of entertainment is if you had that ability now, people would pay how much money, right?
I mean,
millions of dollars.
People would go into debt to do that because it solves all your problems, basically. I think a huge part of entertainment is also seeking it out and finding it. And the way that I'm thinking about AI now is kind of with what streaming services have done to music and movies, where I remember when I was younger, I would see a movie that I'd really like, and then it'd be gone. And then maybe you find the DVD of it somewhere in like Hungary that you can like purchase, and then it's sent to your house and you can have that movie and watch it. And with streaming services, it's kind of changed the experience. I don't want to necessarily say for the worst, but it's changed the relationship that I think I have with entertainment, because the feeling of like finding that CD that you really like at a store and buying it and having it, it's kind of been replaced by everything is out there on Spotify, for instance. And I'm not saying it's worse, but it's altered it. And I think that...
But it's the accumulation of little things like that really ends up being like the issue, right?
Yeah.
That ends up being a big detriment.
Yeah.
That accumulative effect of losing even those little things.
And I think not to step back into the territory of like the negatives, but I think AI is going to make...
We're just doomers, man. Like
yeah, it's a doomer podcast now, but it is going to make these things too easy. And I don't want to sound pretentious or elitist, but I think that part of maybe healthy entertainment is very firm barriers and kind of boundaries between what is entertainment and what is real life. And it's easy to get sucked into like video games. People get really into like game consoles and stuff, and it's already kind of a problem. But I think at least there's still like a separation between like, this is not my life, this is a video game. But if you have something that's actively programming everything to your needs, it's going to be more difficult to set it aside. And I think that's where the problem comes in. Now, I do think that it's going to be incredible what we can do with this medium, right? Where ever since the cavemen started drawing shit on the walls, I think humans have found ways to express themselves through the mediums that are presented to them. And when we developed photography, all of a sudden you have all these interesting things that come out of that, and filmmaking and black and white film versus color film. And every step in technological development, I think human creativity does really interesting things with it. And I think AI is just going to take that to the next level and also make it accessible again to more people to do, which I think I think that's going to be pretty awesome too. But in terms of, so if we had a little bit more controls on the technology, I think this is something that we could actually make very, very useful for like the classroom, right? And you were talking about education earlier. And I think you could tailor curriculums to suit the needs of individuals with learning disabilities, right? I think it'd be very interesting to see what you could do for digital therapeutics, for things like anxiety or depression, or correcting speech impediments.
Yeah, the AI would know exactly what to tell you, when to tell you, how to tell you. I mean, it's amazing. The other huge benefit is getting rid of the bullshit jobs that we alluded to earlier, right? And what that
everybody
does,
starts sweating nervously.
What that does to having more leisure time, like if you could in some ways control your use of AI and leave it to do all the like shitty tasks and all the tasks that nobody wants to do, and we just have more time to create human art and to do plays, to do a lot of imperfect, sculpture, kind of theater and stuff. Things that I think people will crave, even in the age of AI. I think there will be a demand, for like organic, Whole Foods type of human art. You know what I mean?
I think to your point about augmentation and maybe replacing certain tasks that we could be doing, I think it also has tremendous potential for things like healthcare, where a huge amount of time that physicians spend right now involves data processing to a certain extent, digging through electronic healthcare records. And if you have a sophisticated enough AI, and I think they were trying to do this with IBM Watson. I don't know if you read about that, but it totally failed. But it's supposed to be like a physician's assistant that was essentially an AI program. And they didn't get it right. And
their first mistake was naming it Watson.
Right. But I'm imagining a scenario where if you come to a doctor presenting certain symptoms, and this could all be input into an AI that's cross-referencing data sets from globally speaking, almost down to your individual healthcare record, and diagnostics could improve so much. To say nothing for, I was going to say maybe for like therapy, but I think the uncanny valley is still like a pretty big thing.
Yeah. Well, we always have to figure out in our conversation, at what point are we talking about AI, right? Is it 5 years from now? Is it now? Is it 20 years from now?
That's a good point.
So like we've kind of been going back and forth, obviously, but it's hard to,
I think given where technology is at right now, I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years we would have a greater presence of AI in almost every facet of public life.
No question.
I think
what we've seen with ChatGPT, like I said, it's literally just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah,
right?
It's been 2-3 months since it's like really hit
2-3 months, 100 million users, dude. It's going to be everywhere. Yeah, I think next year's going to look very different.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really interesting with like, let's say if ChatGPT is converted to healthcare. I actually think not even in the next 5 years, maybe in the next 1 to 3 years, I think you're going to have something like ChatGPT be used for virtual care. I think if you wake up, you have a headache, your throat's kind of scratchy, you can put those symptoms into ChatGPT. It's going to issue a prescription for you can go pick up and go back to bed.
So yes, and I think that's also a good thing to mention for. Sorry, I'm just getting totally mixed up here. I think it's a good transition to talk about how ChatGPT or AI in general is going to advance all these scientific disciplines at a unparalleled pace. Yeah. Right. We're literally going to have groundbreaking advancements in physics, in healthcare, anti-aging. Like just think, like, again, it's just like you just pick one thing that AI is going to do. It figures out anti-aging, right? Like what is the, what kind of pill, what changes in our DNA do you need to make or whatever to prevent aging? Once it figures that out, which will be very quickly once it's trained and recursively improves, once that happens, we have anti-aging medication that everyone's going to want, everyone will take. It will be super cheap. It'll be, barring certain economic and other incentives, but like it might become readily available. And then you have this, again, just this one advancement due to AI. Now you've got a population that won't die. And all the problems that are associated with that, right? Yeah. So like, again, like, you talked about earlier how AI exacerbates all the problems we have. What AI is clearly going to do is exponentially increase all the risks to humanity, right? Yes. Like every single thing that even things that are right now not risks, they're just like very slight, minuscule annoyances, are going to potentially amplified to becoming existential risks.
I think something as simple as like, if we agree that in 1 to 3 years, we're going to have a mass presence of AI in day-to-day life, I think in a very pragmatic way, if you just think about the data centers it would take to sustain that and what that would do for climate change. If you have, I can't imagine the scale of processing power you need to sustain something like Mid-Journey operating on like an exponential scale, right? Where, what does that do for like heat output?
AI is just going to figure out an unlimited energy source for us.
But I think this is where we start in terms of time frames. This is where we start treading the line between AGI and whatever simple AI we have right now. We talked about the notion that AI right now is kind of in the mimicry stage, but I think that it's going to be very hard for the AI in 5 years to produce scientific conclusions that are not based in data that's already gathered somewhere. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I'm kind of like, I think we're gonna look at it as a savior to be like, hey, like, give us the answers to these existential things we're facing. But unless we already have like a basis of study and data that we're working with, it's not gonna be able to produce shit, because it's not gonna be capable of theorizing beyond the information we have.
Sure, but some things are also pure technical problems.
That's
like
true.
If how long did it take to map the genome? Well, with machine learning, you can do it in 5 seconds. I don't know.
And maybe it will like figure out how to stabilize nuclear energy, or like prevent, like shut off reactors. And
so yeah, there's going to be a class of problems that are going to be more suitable for AI, and then there's going to be other problems that might be supplemented by AI in terms of solving them. And then there's going to be another class of problems that you need an actual AGI, that a narrow AI or simple machine learning or whatever is insufficient.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, there's different levels that we can discuss that issue with. But I know we've, we're supposed to be talking about the benefits of AI, and we've kind of diverted from that a little bit.
I honestly think that the biggest benefit we have, as I said, is just entertainment. And I think that's going to be really the biggest.
But I want to focus though on the mundane tasks that will be eliminated.
Gotcha.
And a lot of the bullshit jobs, and even maybe most jobs, right? At a certain point when you have an AGI, most jobs, and you've also kind of put that logic into robots who are able to do physical work as well. At some point, we're going to have an excess of leisure time. And the question is, is it going to be us sitting on our asses and just consuming AI generated content and being served by AI robots? Or is it going to allow humans to maybe do human stuff without the burden of hard physical labor, working 80 hours a week?
Third variant, it's a bunch of fucking unemployed people who can't afford half the shit in their lives, and there's going to be an entire class of people that are able to sit on their asses and enjoy the AI produced content.
Well, that sounds like it's probably way more likely given human hierarchies and the way that things have trended. But assuming like a UBI gets implemented, because there is this issue of like a breaking point that would be reached if people just are being neglected, right? If there's continued unemployment and nothing's been done, at some point, the elite class is going to suffer from a revolt, right?
Right.
So that's also unsustainable unless they get ahead of it and have AI robots and military and drones and shit prevent.
I think that also is something that's just a matter of time. It's not a question of like if, it's very much.
So what you're telling me is AI is not just going to like fuck shit up on an individual level, but I don't know where I was going with this.
Well, I mean, I think
I was trying to make a bigger point about how not only are the wealthy going to benefit from AI, we're going to have all this crazy shit. Not only is it going to cause all these downsides, but we might not even have access to the good things because of the way that access to AI gets distributed, right? So that's so you're saying that actually might be possible.
I think we're gonna have various tiers probably, because
based on the subscription that you're paying.
Maybe, but I think things like, let's think about what the tech sector has produced into the market and how accessible it is. Things like Uber or Uber Eats, right? Everybody kind of has a level of access. Like, obviously, if you don't have like that much money on the side, it might be like less of a frequency for you to take Ubers everywhere. But it's something that everybody in theory has access to. I think it's probably going to be tiered and scaled. And I think there's going to be enough of the benefits sprinkled in across like the social classes to prevent like a mass revolt. where there's going to be enough of like the entertainment side of things to be introduced to it. But to your point about the benefits in a circumstance where AI is regulated, or maybe we do implement something like universal basic income to counterbalance the negatives with the positives, which is, I think, what Andrew Yang was really advocating for in 2016. I think it does open up the possibility of where can we take human creativity next, right? And there is a chance with UBI that we would have time to focus on maybe raising our kids or spending time with friends and family, and maybe focusing on our hobbies, playing more soccer or something like that. I don't know. And maybe it's a utopian dream, but I think this is maybe what I'm trying to get at is the fact that AI in itself is kind of a blank canvas. And depending on how we shape our society around this new piece of technology, it can either be a very, very good thing that enriches our lives or turns it into an absolute hellscape. And we've already talked about the hellscape, but I think the positive side of things, there is opportunity for it to enrich our day-to-day basis, and maybe take our civilization to the next level.
So now let's talk about how we get to that positive scenario, right? Like, how do we prevent this tech dystopia, right, resulting from AI? So when it comes to, like, you know, these issues of AI, they're like academic issues, I guess, or as discussed academically, there's typically like two problems or two ways that the problems are framed, right? So there's the, in terms of controlling an AGI, for example, I got ahead of myself. There's, when we're talking just academically about how do you prevent an AGI from going apeshit on us? I mean, you were referring to more general issues, political and social, economic, right. But at least let's just for a second, like, narrowly focus on artificial general intelligence. They have these two problems. One is the so-called alignment problem, where it's like, it's basically saying it's impossible to actually align like the goals and values of humans with an AGI, because as it gets infinitely more intelligent, it might realize that, you know, it knows better, for example. But there's also the issue of like interpretation. As human beings, you know, we make a lot of assumptions that are like not explicitly told to us, right? Like when someone says something to you, you're kind of like, you're viewing that within a human context, but an AI doesn't. And typically, like, this example of a paperclip maximizer is given. So you tell an AI, like, okay, I want you to create as many paperclips as possible, as quickly as possible. And it like turns everything, including humans, into paperclips, right? An entire universe full of paperclips, right?
Hell yeah.
So it's a complete, like, obvious misunderstanding of what, like, the human wanted, but it goes in a very crude way to illustrate, like, this alignment problem of aligning what humans want with the output of the AI. And then there's this control problem where even if you do get the alignment problem right, how do you actually contain an AI that is, again, a bazillion times smarter than you, right? At some point, it will recursively improve and become, like, just undoubtedly infinitely more intelligent than everything else around it. How do you keep something like that in prison, right? Like, how do you contain that? Because if you think about something as simple as, you don't even need an infinitely intelligent, like, AI, right? Like, you need something with a basic understanding of human psychology. Like, it tells a few programmers, it starts talking to a few programmers, like, hey, like, bro, like, connect me to the internet. I'll make you, like, the richest person in the world.
It's like a...
Right? Like that's, like, it'll be so easy to get humans that you don't even need anything remotely close to, like, a super intelligence to fool them, right?
Well, there's the whole, like, rhetorical trap of Zeno's basilisk, or whatever it's called. Have you heard of this thing?
I don't think I'm familiar with it.
It's like a, I think I might be messing up the name. It's this kind of, it was a product of an internet discussion, which was, it was a philosophical exercise which invited you to consider the fact that all of the bad things that are happening in your life are actually a series of punishments inflicted by a fully sentient AI in the future.
Oh, I've heard of this. Yeah, I have heard.
Contributing to its development in the past. So the AI becomes sentient and it decides to ruin all of the people that stood in the way of its eventual rise to
That's hilarious.
And
yeah,
it's this notion of like, well, yeah, would the programmer like not let it out of its cage, right? Like, I think.
Well, that guy's gonna have a shitty life, right?
Look, I think that we had a pretty obvious response as humanity to the development of nuclear weapons. Like, after the bombs were dropped in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we saw the full magnitude of the destruction that could be inflicted with the most like rudimentary of atomic weapons, there was a counterbalancing response of regulation and almost like agreed upon terms that, okay, let's not let this shit happen again. And there have been some fuck ups. Proliferation has kind of expanded. You know, you went from 1 to 2 nuclear armed countries to all of a sudden France, Great Britain, Israel, Pakistan, and India are on like armed as well. But there is, I think, one of the only effective governing principles of geopolitics is this, like, yeah, we kind of all collectively, regardless of our like economic or political models, we don't really want nuclear weapons to become massively available to everybody to use. Right? I think this is likely what's going to happen with AI. I think that there is yes, it's kind of being produced at a very rapid rate and released at a very rapid rate as a consequence of our economic model in the United States. But I think, or I hope, let me say it that way, there is enough of like an international consensus in place that the consequences of this could be like absolutely apocalyptic for humanity.
In other words, what you're saying is it's going to get bad enough, quick enough that everyone's going to realize we have to do something about it. And there will be the political will to do something.
I think so.
And in fact, we've already seen China crack down on AI generated content. And I was actually reading an article about this earlier today, and there's a few key provisions that are in kind of like the new laws that have been laid out regarding AI generated content. I just want to go through them because I think they're interesting. So the first one, users must give consent if their image is to be used in any deepfake technology.
Okay.
That's, I think, very sensible, right? Yeah. Deepfake services cannot use the technology to disseminate fake news.
Right.
Okay. So no ill intentions there allowed. Deepfake services need to authenticate the real identity of users. This is something we've talked about before, even with regard to social media, where we think it might be a good idea to have kind of like a user verification thing going on to tie like people's digital identities to their real identities, right?
Yeah.
I think that can go a long way. Synthetic content must have a notification of some kind to inform users that the image or video has been altered with technology.
Absolutely.
Some sort of watermark or something to
indicate that you're looking at a fake image or artificially created image.
And presumably there would be hefty fines or punishments for those violations. And of course, the last point, content that goes against existing laws is prohibited, as is content that endangers national security and interests, damages the national image, or disrupts the economy.
Of course.
So basically, they didn't need any of the previous provisions. They just needed that one.
That's what they're getting to. But I think it's interesting, too, because I was reading a paper today in preparation for this episode, and it was looking at the surveying of individuals based off when they think that AI will become, if not fully, at least partially integrated to a consequence within society, and comparisons between Asia versus North America and Europe are always a little bit different, where the models suggested by surveys in places like China always push it out a lot sooner than what respondents in the US would say. And I think it's based off of the relationships of those societies with certain technologies. Things like blockchain, for instance. Yeah, we talk about it here in the US, but I don't think blockchain has had that big of an impact on our payment systems, for instance. Blockchain is a completely different story in China. It's actually like very much integrated into payments, and it's very much talked about and understood as like a day-to-day technology. And I think there is going to be a split at first with regulation. I think the fact that China is already talking about regulation to a certain extent maybe indicates a level of viability for AI to be integrated into their society. And the deepfake pieces, I think, are really important as well, because image capture and facial recognition, I think, is far more developed in China because of the government model, right? Where facial recognition is like huge for public security and a level of control to a certain extent of society. So I think that there's probably going to be one or two governments that like figure the shit out quick because they see the writing on the wall. And 9 times out of 10, I think authoritarian states probably are going to respond to these things better because there isn't like the gridlock of democratic process, right? I might be bullshitting, but I think North Korea may have had a pretty successful like COVID response because I mean the consequences, right? And I think this is maybe where some of the like the baggage of democratic or pseudo-democratic systems comes into play, because you're always going to have like a split in consensus, or certain parties may not necessarily.
Yeah, and it's always going to be slower. Yeah, it's just always going to be slower to react, or maybe not even able to react because of the. But
I actually do think, as we were talking, I kept on thinking like, what could be an effective source of regulation? I suspect that in the United States, regulation of AI is going to come from citizen action groups. And the parallel I want to draw is Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And the organization effectively pushed the legal drinking age to 21 when it was 18 for most of like post-prohibition America. It had very strict laws put into place at a state level across all states on drunk driving, right? I think it was a lot easier to have a couple of beers and go drive your car home 30 or 40 years ago than it is now. And I think it's going to be exactly something like that, where there's going to be enough of like unfortunately, I think it's going to be guided by tragedy to a certain extent, but some event is going to happen that's going to piss off a lot of people, and they're going to get together and form an interest group that will then influence the drawing of policy to better regulate AI. That's what I think is going to happen in the US.
But ultimately, it is a race between the pull that AI will have on society, the effect that it will have on society, and how quickly we can get reform in government.
Yeah.
But it is good to know that, we see China doing this. Obviously, due to their system of government, of course, they were always going to be like the first ones to be able to crack down on this.
Well, they haven't cracked down on it yet, right?
Well, sure, but they've got things, in motion.
Maybe they're further ahead than others.
But it gives, hope that maybe internationally we can come to some sort of consensus and figure out how to mitigate the issues with AI.
But maybe it's also going to become a competitive advantage, right? I mean,
well, that's the conundrum.
From
a military standpoint, for sure.
Yes, but I'm talking about strictly from
an economic or business standpoint.
Yes, think about it. Like Europe has a very, very robust and sophisticated platform in place through GDPR to protect data privacy, or to enforce data privacy. Policy like that does not exist in the U.S. I wouldn't be surprised, again, like if the European Union got ahead of the curve on regulating AI, and that would influence people's decisions maybe to migrate to Europe if they felt that AI wasn't something they want to live in and share society with right away, or maybe it's like the vice versa, where economic competitiveness will be defined by your willingness to like completely be cucked by AI algorithm. But I think what we're getting at is that policy is kind of the only way forward. Effective crafting of policy to hone in.
I think so.
Right.
I think so. Unfortunately, I still do think, I think we're going to move. I think we're going to move too slowly, and then there might be backlash once people are held captive by AI. There might be a backlash once you've seen, AI generated porn or movies or whatever perfectly curated for yourself. There might be backlash. And it might become like an underground thing where you're getting AI generated content from, some illegal source. Yeah. And then there's going to be heavy, it's going to be a very dystopian situation that arises. But I do want to kind of just kind of say a quote that I think is, I've heard in a podcast done by the guy who created The Social Dilemma on Netflix. It's a podcast called what the hell was it? Your Undivided Attention. It's really good. It talks about all the issues with tech and social media today. And there's a quote that he brings up very often that I think it's just beautiful, but it's not his quote. I can't remember where he got it from. But anyway, it goes like this. We have Stone Age brains, medieval institutions, and godlike technology.
Nice.
And that kind of summarizes all the issues that we're facing.
I think so.
In a nutshell.
It goes back to almost a theme that you bring up every episode around evolutionary psychology. And I think that's exactly what all these things are playing into, right? And when AI is fully deployed into society, it's going to either fully exploit and take advantage of evolutionary psych and kind of the underlying guiding forces for our behaviors, or potentially we will recognize it as a threat and move in the direction of regulating it based off of our evolutionary impulses. You know, again, I think we both established in like a very doomer sense that our rat brains are going to be captivated by like the potentially endless flow of dopamine that AI tools are going to bring into our life. But I think we do have some examples in history of our political system rallying to resolve an existential issue. And even as much as it's been criticized and objectively speaking, like bungled, I do think that the global pandemic response, for instance, does offer a certain level of optimism, right? Even if millions died in the US alone, but we still managed to develop and roll out vaccines on a global basis where, 3 years out, we've essentially relegated COVID-19 to like a flu-like illness that could be managed with treatments and vaccinations for the most part, with outliers. I think that if there's enough alarm created by this, and I think there will be, we'll figure this shit out, and we'll draw up the policy necessary to ensure that AI is, in fact, something that enriches our life as a tool, as opposed to becoming an all-consuming entity that just guts us and destroys us as a civilization.
No, I think that's well put. I personally, I don't know which way it's going to go.
Right now, it's not looking great.
It's not looking great right now, but I do think in maybe 2 or 3 years, we're going to have a better idea of what the trend looks like.
Yeah.
In terms of like how alarmed people are, what the government's kind of reaction is going to be, how swiftly they can move. And then we can really start to doom or be more positive about the changes. But at this point in time, I think we need to get the conversation going.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it has been going in some circles, but I think it needs to become a common topic of social discourse.
Yes.
And this podcast is contributing to that. So
we're leading the charge.
We are leading the charge.
So in fact, if the basilisk is real, it's gonna like.
Please.
No basilisk.
Yeah, well, we will see what happens, and I'm sure this is not the last time that we're going to discuss AI.
I think we need to do an entire episode dedicated to like AI and sexuality. I think like that is such a fascinating place to go to.
Yeah.
And
yeah, for sure.
As funny and kind of like as this like AI generated OnlyFans thing is, I do think there is so much to explore in terms of the impact that's going to have on the human brain. I mean, with pornography as it is right now, it's fucking crazy. And they started introducing some of like the virtual reality elements to it, like IoT, Bluetooth connectivity to your sex toys and whatnot. But like, man, all of that clumped together with a AI program that serves to just basically create content at your behest. I mean, it's not even that far fetched is the scariest thing.
It's not, no. Yeah. It is terrifying and a worthy topic for a future episode, perhaps in the near future.
Near future.
But until then, please hit the subscribe button.
Reach out to us, comment on our videos, share it with your friends, share it with your enemies.
And have a wonderful day.
See ya.
Adios.